if we look at the modern history, there's a few notable inventions that have created a paradigm shift in their particular industry. I think electric cars is a paradigm shift in driving and transportation. I think the internet was, of course, an enormous paradigm shift in communication. Wi-Fi was an enormous shift in security and communication as well. I noticed that cryptocurrencies and blockchain was an enormous shift in the way that we execute software, where every computer program in history has been executed by an organization, or at least an organization by proxy. Now a computer program can run with its own sovereignty.
That is Luke Anderson, and this is episode 17 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. I'm Adriana, and today's guest is Luke Anderson. Luke teaches computer security and is the co-founder of Sigma Prime, a software and security consultancy that is playing a big part in the new Ethereum 2.0 ecosystem by developing a client implementation called Lighthouse. In this chat, we talked about the importance of developing skills like public speaking and coding. We also talked about geeking out at a young age, the new paradigm shift brought on by Ethereum, and much, much more. Here's our chat.
Hi Luke.
Hi Adriana, how are
going?
you? Fantastic, how are you?
I'm alright.
Excellent.
So thanks for having me today.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for being here.
I'm really excited to learn more about you and how you started your career.
How I started my career.
So what inspired you to study computer science?
So computer science, I guess, I was inspired by my parents originally when I was a kid. We had a computer because they're both sort of sciencey people, and I used to play the truck game when I was 3. But I never really got into computers till a bit later when I found out that you can actually put them together and pull things apart. And I always had an obsession with knowing how everything works. I had to know how everything works, because if I didn't, then it was magic, right? And I had to find out the magic behind it. And my family knew this, so whenever there was a fax machine, which you actually remember that, and the new generation don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that, I would end up with the fax machine and I'd pull it all to bits, and sometimes I'd even put it back together again.
Oh, nice.
Only sometimes. And so this fascination for how things work sort of evolved, and to the point where I would actually want to start building things. And I used to make little electronic kits, like you could buy these circuits on mail order, because you couldn't buy things online back then. And I remember I built a little FM transmitter to listen in on my younger brother. And it used to fit into a Tic Tac box, but I did that once, and then I got bored of it and put it away. But
He wasn't having any interesting conversations?
no, it turns out my brother didn't have much to say that I didn't already know anyway. So that was fun. And then through all of high school and stuff, I was quite interested in computers. It was and still how things worked. And then eventually it was like, oh, I have to go to uni now. That's the next step. What am I going to do? I guess I'll do IT. And I also like to know how things work, so I did IT and physics as well, to try and also know how the world works. Didn't quite learn how people worked through those studies, but I
psychology for that?
Yeah, or psychology, or even just like less time spent talking to computers and more time spent talking to people. But that came later. And in fact, between high school and uni, I went on like a youth exchange with the Rotary clubs.
Okay.
And that was
Which country did you go?
So I went to Canada.
Okay.
And people think, yeah, Canada, that's awesome, Whistler or maybe Toronto, and they're so wrong. because I didn't go to either of those places. I went to a lovely little place called Prince Edward Island.
Okay.
Have you heard of Anne of Green Gables?
No.
It's a book, and that's where she grew up. That's what they're famous for: Anne of Green Gables
Yeah.
and potatoes.
Is that on the East Coast or West Coast?
It's very much on the East Coast.
Okay.
And so I lived with a French family there, and they were absolutely lovely. But I was, in Canada, they say I was in the sticks. When we say middle of nowhere, it was like my house, potato field, potato field, potato field, everywhere. So I actually built a potato cannon to try and make the most use of that.
I've shot those here. A friend of mine, her son, he built one.
Yeah.
None of the adults will want to do that, but I am.
Yeah.
I'll come, and we spend a whole afternoon doing that once.
Yeah, it's fun. I had a good fun. I had plenty of ammo there as well.
Oh yeah, in a potato farm.
Yeah. But at that stage of my life, I was not the best at talking to people, and public speaking was absolutely terrifying. And so I still kept tinkering with computers, but because I was on this Rotary Exchange, I had to get up in front of the Rotary Club every week and tell them about my week. And in the beginning of that year, I was absolutely terrified to get up there every week, and I didn't have much to say, or I'd try and get out of it. And but by the end of the year, being forced every week to get up and share something about myself, you start to get a bit more comfortable in front of people. And so I started. I think that sort of year away from IT and actually talking to people for that year really helped me a lot to. That eventually ended up having me lecture and tutor at uni, but that came a bit later.
Such an important skill to have. Like, people underestimate the power of being able to speak in front of an audience and how that can help someone advance their career.
Yeah, and because it's not just speaking in front of an audience either. It's also speaking to someone who's intimidating, right? Because the audience is a group of people. Yeah. And that's really intimidating. But you could also go and speak to a CEO or a venture capital, or someone who you have a lot of respect for, and find that as intimidating, if not more, than a group of people. And so practicing being able to speak while being intimidated is, I would say, almost the general skill of public speaking that I certainly tried to develop.
Do you still get nervous if you have to speak in front of a big crowd, or if you have to speak to an investor, for example?
Well, it depends very much on what I'm speaking about. If I'm speaking about a topic I know well and I'm just getting up there and talking about that, I'm fine. If I have to get up in front of a group of people and talk about myself or be vulnerable, maybe that's a bit of a different story.
Even though it's a topic you probably know best.
That's probably a topic I probably know best, but it's much easier to hold a face in front of a crowd than it is to share what's really going on. So that's something maybe I'm still working on.
Okay, that's good. All right, so you're at uni, and then what happened?
Yeah, so being around uni and playing with IT, everyone's talking about all kinds of wacky technologies, and there was all kinds of things coming out at that time. And one of them was Bitcoin. I did hear about Bitcoin then, and I distinctly remember going onto a Bitcoin faucet and clicking a button and getting some free Bitcoins. Just.
Do you remember which year was that?
Oh man, that would have been 2000, and I remember the classroom. I remember the lecture theatre, and so I could probably look it up, but it would have been 2012, 2013.
Okay.
Yeah, around then, maybe even before, but about then.
Yeah.
And didn't really play with them much, and honestly, they're probably still on a hard drive somewhere, and I have looked for them a little bit, but I haven't managed to track those bitcoins down. But I wouldn't say I got into it then, because I thought, oh, this is a cool money, and that is pretty game changing. I used to download things on torrents back before Spotify was a thing, and that was the only way to get music. And so I was familiar with these sort of decentralized technologies, and Bitcoin was definitely interesting, but it never really took a huge, I didn't get into it then, that's for sure. Then I carried on through uni, and in one of my final years, I ended up doing a subject on information security, computer and network security. It was called ELEC 5616, and it was taught by this gentleman who was very inspiring lecturer, unlike most of the professors you see at uni, he was an entrepreneur and he had a big business and was doing lots of stuff, and he was kind of lecturing on the side. And as part of the course, he set challenges to, kind of hack him in some ways, like social engineer information about him. And one in particular was his student number from when he was at a university in the US. And I took that by the horns. I was like, all right, we're going to find out everything. And I stalked him, with permission, of course. I remember calling his parents to try and socially engineer his birth date out of him, because I found his parents' number somehow. And then I ended up calling the university and really hounding them, because either I was going to get that number or no one was going to get it. And so eventually I never got the number.
Did anyone else get
but
the
no one else got the number.
Okay.
So I did win the challenge.
Did no one else get the number because you scared everyone at that university off and they wouldn't give up the information?
That was my plan, and that's exactly what happened. They ended up emailing the lecturer explicitly being like, someone is trying to steal your identity or your information. Let's set up a passcode so that they can't. And the next week he came into the lecture and goes, who the hell has been calling the university? and I had to sort of put my hand up, pretending to be ashamed, but really being like, yeah, that was me, I got this. And so that was fun. I like being a smartass sometimes. And so I got to be a smartass to him, and he appreciated that. So eventually he gave me a job, as you do.
Of course.
Yep. And I actually worked at that company for about 3 years. And that was a really large website, with millions of users and stuff. And so I started out there as an intern, just cutting code and building some of the first messaging systems in that website. And eventually my passion for IT security sort of came forward, and I was in charge of security there for a long time. And that was fun. I learned a lot. Eventually I moved on to working on startups and all kinds of other things. I ended up starting a PhD. But on my very last day at that company, I was in the elevator leaving, and the boss was there, and my previous lecturer, and he goes, oh yeah, that's right, I quit teaching. I'm not teaching anymore. I was like, what? You quit teaching? This is not okay. That was so inspiring for me. That was
inspiring teacher.
Yeah, that was like my favorite subject at uni. You can't quit teaching. Oh damn. So I was like, oh, I'll go to the uni. So I went to the uni. I was like, guys, I'll teach it. Because I'd actually filled in from lectures before, and I'd sort of tutored the course a bit as well. So I was like, guys, I'll lecture it. I'm good to go. And they'd actually already found another lecturer, but the person they found was not particularly good at lecturing, quite frankly. And so they put me. I shared it with him that first year, and then eventually it's something that I found a lot of passion for, because I really enjoy the inspiration that you see in their faces, because in my students' faces.
So you are an inspirational teacher, like the teacher that.
Yeah, I try to be.
Taught you the same.
Yeah, I try to be, because
That's good.
I was really inspired, and that made a big difference to me. And so I really wanted to carry that forth and make sure that that the students had that had a continuation. And so now I ask the students to hack me.
I was just gonna ask that question. And have they been able to?
Yeah, so one year I set the challenge as what is my driver's license number?
All right.
And go. Good luck. Don't do anything illegal. It's definitely a very important clarification. We talk a lot about morality and law in my class. But they, some students realize that I have a habit of putting my wallet down in the lectern before I start, and manage to distract me before the end of the lecture and just take my wallet and got my license number that way. And that, I'll admit, that was my fault that time. I messed it up. But another group did it in exactly the way I was hoping. They, I didn't have any expectation, but they did a great job. What they did is that they discovered that I was actually in search of a housemate at the time. And I'd posted on flatmates.com.au being like, oh, here's, I've got a house here, da-da-da-da. And of course they made a profile, went on to the website, they and said, yeah, I'm interested. And they had this, picture of a cute girl, and then they were like, oh, but I'm a bit, I don't really want to go to a stranger's house because, I've got a problem with that. I'm like, oh, well, it's fine,
Of
it's
course,
fine.
security first.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Well, all right, meet me at the pub down the road. Okay, that's fine. I'll meet you at the pub. Okay, fine, all right. So on the day, I went to meet this girl as a potential housemate, and I walked down to my local pub, walked up to the door, and did security, and I checked the license and all that sort of stuff, and I walked into the pub, and I saw the owner there because I knew, and I go, oh, mate, your bouncer just ID'd me. I mean, I've been coming here for 5 or 6 years. I've never been ID'd before. He turns around and goes, we don't have a bouncer. And the bar girl comes up and goes, what are you talking about? We don't have a bouncer. And I just stopped. Dropped myself. I didn't even say anything. I just ran outside, chasing this person. And then they were long gone by that time. And then of course I had to re-enter the pub and kind of explain what was going on because I just freaked out the everyone in the pub. But that was excellent. They had actually hired their friend who was into improv. He was in the improv societies at uni and stuff, and they asked him to pretend to be the bouncer and of course read my license number when checking my ID. And he was pretty good. He had a whole line about, I was like, oh, what are you checking my ID for? And he's like, oh yeah, they've changed the laws recently. So that was good, thinking on your feet.
Okay, that's good.
And that's something that I think is important to teach, is that social engineering aspect, right? And how to leverage people, because they're almost always the weakest part of a system. And another reason to learn how to talk to people instead of just computers.
True. So did they get an A?
They won that component. There's that particular component of the course that has a ranking system, and they nailed that. And I think they got the. I don't know if they actually came first, but they certainly got my kudos in the lecture in front of everyone else.
Oh,
So
that's great.
they got the good story, and everyone got some laughs.
And you got a good story to tell too.
And I got a great story. That's one of my. I've got a few others, but that's definitely my favorite one.
That's an awesome one indeed. All right, so you are now lecturing at uni, and what else are you doing? You've quit the other job?
Yeah. So I lecture at uni still, just 1 day a week on my lecture day, and then. But while I was still working at that big website, I actually ended up at this Bitcoin conference day thing, and one of the coin people that give out have one of those online wallets where they're like matchmaker kind of websites. They were giving out free Bitcoins on the day, and I was like, oh, this is cool, all right. And I'd already been playing around with it a little bit then. It was starting to ramp up. And I'd already been playing, I like building computers, so I'd already sort of built a hobby miner at home and was, mining Dogecoin or something silly like that. And then there was this gentleman that was speaking at it, and he was trying to explain this new concept of actually storing data on the blockchain and having execution on the blockchain. And at first I didn't quite get what he was talking about. And then I really had this light bulb moment, and I was like, oh wow. They're going to run websites on the blockchain. It's not just going to be, this is not just a money thing anymore. And from that moment, I really knew that what was coming was a lot more than just changing our money. And so from that, we were inspired, and I was following Ethereum quite closely as a result of that. Until a point where the mainnet actually launched in the very first stage, Frontier, and and when that happened, we were ready to go. We had our computers sitting there. We were downloading the client and trying to fix bugs in the Go code, even though we'd never programmed Go before, trying to get it to work on day zero, and that was really fun. And I mean, we certainly were. It was very much amateur, literally, 4 graphics cards in a milk crate with a power supply hanging off the side with a whole bunch of cable ties. Was our game, but it was just a bit of fun. I was also doing my PhD at the time, and so some of the ideas that I was working through with my PhD were I was starting to make them around these sort of decentralized concepts because I was so fascinated with it as well. And of course, we need to mine some to be interacting with it and all this sort of stuff. Eventually, I sort of started hearing about other people around that were playing with this stuff, and I got involved with the Sid Ethereum group, which an acquaintance of mine at the time had started. So I got involved in that, and then because I'd also been lecturing, I'm not afraid to get up in front of a group of people anymore. I would, of course, explain what was going on in Ethereum. One time I even brought my miner in and said, hey, this is how it works. And yes, it is really noisy, it produces a lot of heat, and I don't recommend you do it. And so after doing that for quite a while, we started getting asked a lot of questions, me and several of my friends. Started getting asked all of these questions about, okay, well, can we build this? And does it work like this? And most of the time it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Just use a database. No, that as well. No, we don't want that. Just put like MySQL there,
Yeah.
and you're done.
How many times do you reckon you said just use the database in the past 4 years?
Oh, I kind of gave up on a lot of the consulting eventually, so I sort of limited myself on that. But yeah, too many times to count, that's for sure. And so people started asking us a lot of questions, and eventually it got to the point where it was like, oh, what happens if someone sues us? Or what happens if, how do we hire someone? Oh man, we need a business here. We can't just be doing this anymore. And so we had to start, so we started our business, Sigma Prime, about halfway through 2016. We also realized that having gone to these community meetups, that it's really important to get involved with people, right? Because as much as blockchains and cryptocurrency, it's not, this, people think it's immutable and untouchable, and it's like, no, this is not our AI overlords running it. It's actually humans programming it and humans running the machines.
Yes.
And so being involved in that community, I think, is particularly important. And so we bought tickets to China and went to the DevCon 2, the second Ethereum, or kind of technically third Ethereum developers conference. And there it was just, if we were inspired before, after hearing all the talks there, we were, exceptionally inspired. And I think it was actually there that we ended up naming our company Sigma Prime after the Ethereum yellow paper. And so as that grew, we did quite a bit of consulting in the beginning, because that's, we were asked a lot of questions. We were like, okay, well, we'll do consulting. That seems to make sense. And while that was fun and we, it certainly was profitable, it's not at our hearts what we love to do. What we really love to do is to build things and create something. We also like to break things. That's also fun. And so the consulting started to become a lot more security reviews, right? And security investigations, because of our background in information security and hacking and breaking things. It's a very in-demand set of skills, which is another reason I try to teach it, because I know that we don't have enough people in that space and I want to put some more people through it. And so we continued that, and we started refining the security offering that we had. That again, as much as fun as breaking things is, we still want to actually build things as well. And so we had all kinds of ideas that we would come up with. We knew we wanted to find a project to work on. We weren't quite sure what that project was, but we wanted to find something to work on. And so we thought, we'll build an exchange. The other exchange in Australia was absolutely terrible at that time. It's not as terrible as it used to be, but it was really bad then. And so we thought, we can do better than this. We'll build an exchange. And we started that road. And then we wanted to, launch a satellite. And we had all kinds of ideas and interesting things that we were exploring. And eventually, one of my colleagues, Paul, was playing around with this specification for the next generation of Ethereum, and was sort of researching it and cutting some code here and there. Maybe try this. And just like in the beginning, where we were like, oh wow, actually we're experts in this now because we've just been tinkering with it for the last year. He started becoming, oh wow, I'm actually an expert in this new thing that we think is coming and we're designing, and thought, well, this is a project for us. We want a project. Here it is, right? And so we decided as a collective to actually just build a client. and the Ethereum Foundation had been publishing the spec and doing all this sort of stuff. And so in our spare time, I mean, I say spare time, but like in very much in work time, we decided to work on this project. So, you know, in that sense, our security offering, the money we were pulling in from that was funding this open source development on the side that we were interested in and stuff. And then we quickly realized that was unsustainable, right? If we want to work on this, we can't do both all the time. And we can't work on the one we want to work on, which is building stuff, when we're spending all of our time breaking stuff for money. And so we started looking around at a way to fund this, and of course grants is a pretty obvious one. We'd seen that different groups had gotten different grants in the past from the Ethereum Foundation and from other people, and thought, well, maybe we should just see if we can ask for some money to help us do that. And so we did. We applied for a grant with the Ethereum Foundation, and we got that, and we were, you know, exceptionally appreciative for that, because now it means that, okay, actually we can dedicate a resource to this, or more than one resource, and in fact, let's get another resource on. And so we've hired a couple of my students from my class as well, the ones who show a keen interest and who have learned Rust, and so we get them on board and involved in that. We then ended up with also a grant from Vitalik himself over Twitter, which was awesome. And both those are the two biggest grants we've gotten to date. But there's certainly other contributors we've had through Gitcoin and that sort of thing. And that's really allowed us to focus on this and actually make this our priority and a reality. And maybe after we reach the next milestone, we'll be going for another round of looking for grants and hoping to get some sort of donations, because unfortunately, funding is a problem faced by almost all open source projects.
Yes.
And a lot of people as well, and not only just the projects, but the individuals who want to work on these projects. You know, they do it a lot of time in their spare time, but they want to do it as a job. They'd love to be able to contribute to open source as a job, but just simply can't afford it. And that is a big problem in this space, that I think grants and these kinds of funding structures are helping, but at the same time, it's not necessarily sustainable.
What is the rough timeline for a project of this size, like building an Ethereum client?
I think it depends very much on your approach to the problem. If we were a private company designing a product and launching that product, right, you could probably do it in a year, right? Because you're focused on it, you've got a lot of resources to throw at it, you're organized, and you're not dealing with external parties, right? Your communication overheads are really low, and your communication is very efficient. In an open source project, it's a very different story. You have multiple teams all working on different implementations of the same thing. You have, you know, someone else, some other researchers trying to guide that, and then you've got all of this like massive organizational overhead. Plus, it's almost all of it is remote, because, you know, people working on open source stuff tend to want to be working from home, or they work.
Or they work a job.
Or they have a job and they have to work from home, or they're overseas. You know, there's a lot of people we've had contributors from all around the world helping us out with Lighthouse, and it's been awesome. But it certainly presents a unique challenge that a private corporation who, you know, employs people in-house wouldn't necessarily face.
All right, long journey.
It certainly has been.
And it's just the beginning.
Well, you know, is it just the beginning, or like it's all just one big line, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just the beginning for crypto, I think.
Oh yeah, certainly the beginning for crypto.
So what was the most inspiring thing for you about this crypto stuff?
Yeah, I think it was noticing the paradigm shift. There's been a few, if we look at the modern history, there's a few notable inventions that have created a paradigm shift in their particular industry. I think electric cars is a paradigm shift in driving and transportation. I think the internet was of course an enormous paradigm shift in communication. Wi-Fi was an enormous shift in security and communication as well. I noticed that cryptocurrencies and blockchain was an enormous shift in the way that we execute software, where every computer program in history has been executed by an organization, or at least an organization by proxy. Now a computer program can run with its own sovereignty almost. The way I explain it is that every computer program you've ever used that deals with money or interacts with money is really just an interface that a company has put forward for you to interact with their money. The company has the money, or some individual organization has the money, and then they provide an interface for that interaction. And for the first time in human history, Ethereum has allowed a computer program itself to own and control money, right? And that is something that is an extremely powerful concept that is a game changer, in my opinion, right? That a program can actually control money. Now, I, in some ways, don't think that's particularly useful in established and wealthy nations, right? Because our institutions are effective, right? If someone creates a lottery and it's dodgy or it's unfair, well, that person's probably going to go to prison. There is serious consequences, and it's very likely those consequences will be enacted upon. But in developing nations, institutions are untrustworthy, and that is a problem that affects the entire society. As soon as you say that, okay, well, you don't need to trust this institution anymore, now you can actually just trust this piece of code, which is behind it is just mathematics, right? Now you can just trust mathematics with your money. I think that paradigm shift is extraordinarily powerful.
Okay, but until we have AI building this code, humans are building the code, right?
That's true.
So how do you transfer? Aren't you just transferring this trust or mistrust from the entity to the person who writes the code?
Yes, absolutely. And I've heard before people say things like, blockchain systems are trustless, or you don't need to trust them anymore. And that is absolute nonsense. You are very much trusting the code. You're trusting the code authors, you're trusting the network, and you're trusting the algorithms. I mean, most people certainly won't understand how they work, right? But for the same reason, you trust an airplane when you fly. Like, do you know how a plane flies? Well, maybe. Certainly most people don't. And they certainly don't understand the immense amount of engineering that actually goes into keeping it in the air for long periods of time. Yet they're quite happy to go on that because they trust the scientific method. They trust the process that goes through. And so in blockchains and cryptocurrency, we're trusting the open source process.
Open source is the
key. Open source is the operative word there. And I have heard of closed source blockchain projects. And every time I've heard of them, it's absolute nonsense. I would never, ever use a closed source blockchain project. It is pointless.
Then you have to trust the institution, which is what blockchain is trying to solve.
Exactly right. And so at least if it's open source, you don't necessarily, you still have to have some trust for the institution that authored it, right? But you can now know that trust can come under much, much deeper scrutiny, right? For the same reason, you look at Linux and you compare that with Windows, right? Nobody can see the source code of Windows. It's very difficult unless you're a Microsoft employee, right? There's, let's say 10,000 people that work at Microsoft who can see that code. Linux has, 50 times that at least people that look at the source code and can actually discover things. And that transparency holds people accountable, which is something that we don't have in private institutions and closed source software.
Exactly. All right. Oh, we reached 32 minutes.
Nice.
So how about we end with some tips for people that are just looking into blockchain now, or I was gonna say people who are thinking about going to computer engineering, but these are completely different tips.
They are. I would focus on, to the people who want to get involved in crypto and help the movement. I would say learn to program, right? Because we need development and we need it in mass, and also then go on to things like GitHub and find issues. Integrate yourself with the community of developers that surround projects. So most GitHub projects will have issues tagged as good first issue. And they're a great place to get involved. And just maybe it's something quite simple, maybe it doesn't seem like it helps much, but it will get you up to speed. That means that you'll be able to make more meaningful contributions in future.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Easy.
Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure.
And I will be seeing you soon.
That's quite likely.
Awesome. Cheers.
That was the awesome Luke Anderson. Luke is definitely one of the coolest dudes I've met down the crypto rabbit hole. His passion for Ethereum and decentralized computing is definitely contagious. To get in touch with Luke, head out to Sigma Prime's website at sigmaprime.io, sigmaprime.io. There are a few different touch points there. And if you're in Sydney and interested in learning more about Ethereum and Lighthouse, my advice is to join the Ethereum Sydney meetup. They host meetings once a month, and you can sign up at meetup.com/ETHSydney. So I will post the link in the show notes. As usual, you can reach me on Twitter at abellotti. Feel free to send me guest suggestions, questions, what's on your mind. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and share. That makes me real happy. Thanks for listening, and I will see you at the next block. Bye.